What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Crimson Connective, where today we're discussing the Utah-Oregon State game with BeaversEdge publisher Brenden Slaughter. Brenden, thanks for taking some time to talk with us about some football. How are you doing?
What's going on, Cole? Appreciate the invite, guys. Happy to jump on and talk some ball. We got a big game coming up this Friday down in Corvallis, and yeah, things are going well, man. I've actually got a semi-vacation plan next week, so
Nice.
I'm pretty amped up. How about yourself? How are things over in Utah?
Oh, it's great. You can't complain too much. You're an undefeated team. There's not much to complain about. The offense has been so-so, but the defense is amazing, and we're headed into an interesting matchup. I think potentially the two best defenses in the conference, or at least darn near close to that. So yeah, let's just jump in, man.
Sure.
Now, before we get to the end of the game, I just want to ask you, and we talked about this a little bit before jumping on here. So answer it, exactly the way that you want to. But how surreal and shocking to you is it that this is the last year of the Pac-12? Can you take me through the unfortunate reality for Oregon State right now, and what's everybody going through?
Yeah, like you said, the unfortunate reality is kind of a good way to start. I mean, it's kind of been like the dark cloud that's kind of loomed over this entire season, even really before it began. I mean, to have everything kind of, you know, with the conference kind of fall off the rails as it did, it there was a lot of frustration, a lot of anger, a lot of emotions. I talked to quite a few Beaver fans throughout this process, and a lot of them still can't believe it's real, kind of a thing where it's to know that, like, the rivalry game with Oregon done, Civil War, years and years and years. Maybe they play it, maybe they don't, but regardless, next year it's cooked. And that's something that, like, for me growing up in the state as an Oregonian, I don't really know what Thanksgiving weekends, or even back when I was a kid, weekend before that, what is like without that game. It's just
Sure,
that part is
it's part of your
sentimental.
DNA. Yeah,
Yeah, sentimental to me as a fan, before I, crossed over and joined the reporter ranks. But it's overall, like, I think Washington State and Oregon State are, you know, just kind of, for lack of better terms, hanging on to see what happens. I still think there are positive outcomes from this, and I think that,
sure.
whether it be getting an invite to a conference like the Big 12, raiding the Pac-12 and getting the funds and finances out of it to rebuild and run the Pac-2 to whatever it's going to be, or some sort of reverse merger with the Mountain West. Oregon State will still play football. That's, they're not
Sure.
canceled. We're not death penalties shutting down the team, but it will be different, and the opponents will be different. And you know, for those who grew up like, hey, every couple of years we go see USC at Reser Stadium. Not going to happen, right? So those kind of marquee big time games that have just come through via the conference slate over the years, those will be tough to get over. But I know, talking to Beaver fans recently, they just want some sort of a solution to this sooner than later, and it sounds like we're going to have that probably within the next month or so. But even still, it's definitely been, for lack of better terms, a crappy situation for the two schools left.
Yeah. Yeah, it's super unfortunate. I mean, it's tough to sit here, covering a program that is going to remain in P5. That probably not too long ago would have been in the same shoes as Oregon State and Washington State. It's only really recently
Yeah,
that
it's true.
Utah started to have championship type football being played consistently. And I think those two Pac-12 championships are a huge reason as to why they have been able to stick around. But I think, even if there's not an immediate solution, I think one of the most important things to remember, and something that Coach Whittingham's been talking about a lot lately, even in a recent press conferences, it's going to keep changing. This isn't the last time that the cards are shuffled. Things are going to
Sure.
change, and conferences are going to come and go, and eventually it's probably just going to be a few big conferences. And so, Oregon State is a great program. It's a program that I very much respect. Anytime the Utes have to play the Beavers, it's generally not an easy game, especially up there. It's going to be a battle, just like it was a few years ago when Oregon State was able to take care of business and beat the Utes before they did go on to win the Pac-12 championship. So,
Yeah.
um, but yeah, a lot of good points there. So I guess we'll see what happens. Transitioning though, disappointing loss this past week. what's kind of the general feeling on this Oregon State team sitting at 3-1? I mean, still a good record, but 0-1 in conference play, 3-1 overall. How are people feeling about the Beavers right now?
Yeah, I think it's possible that the team and the coaches are doing better than the fans right now because it was a gut punch. I mean, to see Oregon State come out that flat and that kind of just out of sorts. I mean, that was such a weird game in Pullman, right? What a surprise. Tell me if you heard that
Yeah,
headline before. Weird game in Pullman, but just it's a tough place to play. Oregon State hasn't won since
yeah.
2013, and that streak continued. And
It's
I
a good
think
Washington State team. That's a
it
very good
is, and I
Washington
think
State team.
yeah, and I think for Oregon State specifically, Cole, it was just a bad first opening conference matchup in the sense that,
Sure.
where Oregon State's strength in the defense lies, at least early in the year, is in the front seven, not the secondary. They lost three big time contributors in that secondary, a couple guys that are on, active NFL rosters now. And, losing those secondary pieces, you kind of figured the beginning parts of the year were going to be maybe a little bit shaky in the back end, but that the defensive line, linebackers would be stronger. Then you go play Cam Ward, who outside of Michael Penix, Caleb Williams has a case to be the next quarterback in that discussion right now. No disrespect to Bo Nix, but Cam Ward's put up ridiculous numbers. So, I think that all that combined, and then with the Beavers being flat, not quite as ready as they needed to be, they spotted Washington State for 14 points and, got down and were kind of playing catch up the whole way. So, with that, I think that talking to Jonathan Smith today and, eventually the players tomorrow and whatnot, it seems like the response has been good. But at the same token, Oregon State came into this year with Pac-12 championship aspirations, and you lost your mulligan. So it's that part of it, I'm sure internally is very frustrating because Oregon State started off Pac-12 play 0-2 last year before rattling off and only losing one the rest of the way. So that part of it intriguing for sure.
Definitely. I mean, as the Pac-12 often does, it eats itself alive. Nobody's
Mm,
escaping. I don't think anybody's escaping with with anything less than at least one loss, maybe two, just with how
right.
good everybody at the top is. And then you have these dark horse teams like Washington State, like Oregon State, that maybe aren't quite in that conversation with the top teams, but they can definitely take these other teams, by surprise. They can beat them. They can upset them any day, any place, any time. So,
Sure.
and like you're saying, I mean, just like the first game of the season, the first conference game is just such a big learning curve.
Hmm.
There's so much that you have to figure out, and you have to figure it out quickly. And a lot of times, there's pretty much nothing that goes right, and everything goes wrong, and you're trying to get back into it. The Beavers almost did, but just too little, too late, unfortunately. Close game, but they do find themselves at 3-1. So can you give me just kind of a quick breakdown? You mentioned a few things, but just basically a quick breakdown of this Oregon State team. Maybe some of the standout individuals, the team as a whole, what's different last year, and maybe what areas have they improved?
Yeah, it's interesting because you look at the Oregon State team from last year, and there's quite a few pieces returning, minus those secondary guys that I mentioned, and then obviously the biggest change is DJ Uyunglele under center. Excuse me. It's still getting that pronunciation down to say it right quick. But yeah, I mean that was the biggest thing, right? Oregon State goes 10-3 last year, smacks Florida in the Las Vegas Bowl. For what it's worth, Florida looked about the same as when you guys beat them in week one. Looks like they just carried over that awesome Vegas Bowl performance. And the general notion with Oregon State was they were a quarterback away, right? You looked at what that team was last year. You look at the losses to USC, the
Yeah,
loss to Utah, which was obviously the most, biggest point spread margin, and then the loss to Washington. Those were all games where it was identifiably like needing better quarterback play. And
hey,
then
but
you
we
come into
appreciate that Civil War. We appreciate that victory. Much
Yeah,
appreciated, I
I'm
must
sure
say.
you do. Well, here's the thing, Cole. Oregon State fans didn't know it'd be their last Civil War in Reser Stadium. So go figure, right? I guess
Walk
it
away with
turned
a
out to
dub.
be, yeah. So I guess that worked out. Maybe the football gods were menting that to be as it was meant to be. But yeah, it's still basically the same Oregon State team that we've seen the last couple of years. They're going to hang their hat on the run game. They're going to try to work in the pass defensively. They're going to be aggressive. They're going to try to bring pressure. if there's an area that, Washington State, like you said, kind of exposed last week, I think it was the secondary, but, Utah doesn't quite have the same aerial attack that Washington State does. And, Nate Johnson isn't Cam Ward right now. So that's, I think in that regard, like Oregon State playing Utah is a much better, matchup across the board. But yeah, I mean, for the most part, it's minus a few new guys and new pieces. It's pretty much the same Oregon State team we saw last year.
Yeah, that run game, man, it's always something. It's always tough. It's always, a couple guys too. It's generally not just one individual. It's usually a double or three-headed monster. And this year it's the exact same thing. I was just looking over some of the statistics, and it's a good solid run game. Um, Overall, though, pretty well balanced offense, especially with the quarterback that you do have now. The yards seem to be very very close. There's a few more touchdowns coming on the ground as opposed to through the air, but just based off what you've seen and what you've seen Oregon State do and what you've maybe seen defensively from Utah, how do you expect the Beavers to attack the Utes this weekend?
Yeah, it's going to be a challenge. I mean, like I said, we had Jonathan Smith's press conference today, and he was asked, "What does Utah do well defensively?" And he said, "Everything," and then proceeded to list off about 15 football terms that, unless you're a real football guy, you're kind of going way over your head. So I'm like writing all these down. I'm like, man, these are some unique things that even I didn't know about as far as just the
Sure,
film and the eyes of it and whatnot. And
sure,
there's a lot of respect for that defense. And you look at last year, Oregon State going back to Salt Lake, they were probably pretty confident after knocking off Utah and Corvallis the year prior, and Utah was ready to punch him in the mouth. I mean, I think back to that Clark Phillips pick six early in that game last year really set the tone for that matchup. And
hmm
for the most part, I think it'll be very similar to the game that we saw in Corvallis a couple years ago. I think the points will be a little bit lower. I can see this being a bit more of a grit and grind type game. Utah obviously likes to, very much like Oregon State, lead with the run to set up the pass. And that's where Oregon State's strength is as a defense, again, is in that run defense. So specifically, offensively attacking Utah, I think the run game is going to be key. Getting a big push from the offensive line is going to be even more key. Oregon State seems to play and run the ball a little bit better at home than they do on the road, and I think more than anything, the Beavers are going to be looking to get DJU into some kind of a rhythm. Early on. You look at the San Diego State game, kind of had some weird kind of endings to it. DJ didn't look quite as good as we saw in the first two games, and then that carried over into the first half this last week, and he was able to find his rhythm late in that fourth quarter as the Beavers, mounted their rally and were able to kind of get some 2-minute offense going. But outside of that 2-minute offense, he didn't look all that world beating either. So I think the emphasis of the running game, the Beavers might take some shots to get DJ some confidence. And then, they kind of stumbled onto DJ's running package last week a little bit against Utah or against Washington State, excuse me. And I think they'll maybe be working that in as well because it's, 6'4", 240 pounds. DJ's a load to bring down.
Just a quick follow-up and just a short answer, as short as you can make it. How worried are you about Oregon State's run game given how good Utah's been? I mean, they held Florida to 13 total yards. They just held the number 3 run offense in the country to less than a first down, 9 total yards for the Bruins. How worried are you about Utah's run defense?
Yeah, no, it's impressive. I'd be more worried if this game was in Salt Lake City. I know they say defense travels, but Oregon State's home atmosphere is impressive.
Sure.
The one loss Oregon State has in the last two seasons is to USC, and they needed every bit of a Caleb Williams Bush push to get that win last season. So Oregon State's confident at home, and I think more than anything. It's their commitment to the run game. I mean, I think as good as Utah's defensive line is, Oregon State, per a lot of metrics, has one of the top, 10, if we're being conservative, offensive run blocking lines in the country. So that alone gives me confidence. It could be a little bit of a kind of Oregon State breaks a play, Utah gets a loss, and then I can really see a lot of give and take with two kind of juggernauts going at each
Yeah,
other as far as
it's
the
gonna
O
be
line versus
it's gonna be a
the D
battle.
line. But yeah, to put it that way, for sure.
Yeah. So you mentioned the new quarterback DJU transfer solid pickup out of the transfer portal for sure. Can you just expound a little bit more on him? How would you describe him as a QB? Where does he excel? Where does he struggle?
Yeah, describing him, I'd say big, physical, smart, but at the same token, still showing some of those, I don't want to say warts, but just some of the inconsistencies that he had at Clemson, particularly completion percentage. There have been a couple games where DJ looked really good and a couple games where he didn't quite have it. And, Jonathan kind of talked about it today a little bit in his press conference, mentioning it's a little bit of everything. It's a little bit of DJ needing to make some throws that he needs to make. It's a little bit of the receivers needing to get open. It's a little bit of the offensive line needing to protect him better. But to DJ specifically, at the bare minimum, he's the most talented quarterback Oregon State's had since Sean Mannion 10 years ago. And that alone, while it hasn't been perfect yet, gives you optimism because the talent is there. DJ can launch a football as far as I've seen a quarterback launch a football. Got a cannon of an arm. He can make all the throws on the field. The question is, can he make all those throws consistently? We haven't seen that yet, and that was kind of an issue at Clemson. And again, the Clemsonites that are, really kind of threw DJ under the bus, for lack of better terms, when he was on his way out.
Sure.
And, looking back at Clemson and, Cade Klubnik's played a little bit better in the loss to Florida State this last weekend, but, you look at that loss to Duke, a lot, maybe it wasn't, all DJU and Clemson, maybe it's a combination of both. And I think he's still kind of getting a feel for his personnel around him, the coaches, how much freedom he has to operate, do some different things. So coming into the season, I think we're going to be seeing the best version of DJ. It's been a little hit and miss now, but more than anything, at the very base level, his talent at
Mhm.
the very base is better than any Oregon State quarterback in a decade.
It's a new playbook. It's new personnel. It's a new staff. It's new tactics. It's a new
Yeah,
place. It's a new setting. It's gonna take some time. And like you said, he's very talented. And I think you give him a little bit more time, a couple more games, and he could be really dangerous. Um, Transitioning here, just the last few questions for you. If you are head coach Jonathan Smith, which Utah position group is giving you sweats at night? I mean, what are you worried about? What's keeping you up, and where are you going? Which position group are you going? Man, I don't know how I'm going to deal with this.
yeah, I think you kind of hit it on the head. I would go with, I'm going to cheat and say the whole front seven for Utah because Oregon State still is a team that, you know, uh, not so much like Washington, because Oregon State ran the ball well against Washington State. It's when Oregon State truly struggles when an opponent completely shuts down their run game and then they become a 100% pass dimensional team. We've seen that very rarely though in the last couple seasons. I mean, I'd have to go back to more like the 2020 COVID season probably to see more of that. Simply because Oregon State's gone up against really good defensive lines in front seven these last 2 years with this the crux of this really good offensive line and still been able to get their guys yards with enough patience and persistence at it. Maybe it's more toss plays, maybe it's counters, maybe it's stretches. They just run the ball so well, Cole, that despite like a team having a great interior front seven, they'll still be able to get some plays and make some plays. But to answer your question, yeah, I think Jonathan Smith is definitely worried about that front seven because it will be harder to get DJ into that rhythm you need to win a game like this if you can't run the ball at all.
Yeah, I mean, they've been relentless, especially the past couple games, especially against UCLA. I mean, 7 sacks. Jonah Ellis was just a man on a mission. He was
Mm,
not going to be denied. And on that, especially on that last drive, got to him multiple times. The offensive line just had no chance, and I would expect
right.
them to want to make DJ's life just as hard as they did for the last few guys. Do you have a few, kind of short keys to victory for Oregon State? Maybe two or three things. It doesn't have to be super in depth, but two or three things that you think, hey, if they can get these done, they're going to walk out with a W.
Yeah, I think Oregon State just has to come out and play fast just to start. The start in Pullman was so slow, and even the game against San Diego State had some weird vibes to it. So Oregon State needs to get back to, obviously starting the game fast, but then having the crowd behind you as well. Secondly, is going to be to score because watching that game with UCLA this last weekend, I think UCLA's offense, obviously Dante Moore playing on the road as a true freshman in Rice Eccles, that's not going to typically end well. So it's but with that point, when you realize that UCLA only allowed 7 offensive points, that's something too where I think if Oregon State thinks they can score, they might have the advantage of being able to score at home in a home environment rather than, Nate Johnson and the Utah offense maybe playing from behind. So I think points offensively are going to be, key in this game. The more you can score, I think is going to work in Oregon State's favor. And then defensively, you're just going to have to try to find a crack in Utah's armor, because I think, I think Oregon State will be able to make some plays, but I think it could be tough sledding, from time to time. So I think, being able to be consistent offensively, and then obviously limiting the effectiveness of Nate Johnson or Cam Rising if he plays. I'll say now I don't expect it. I'm not connected as you guys are, but who knows, right? With injuries in college football. But yeah, I think those would be some keys right off the bat for sure.
Now, on the flip side, if you were going to attack Oregon State, just with all your in-depth knowledge, watching this team for the last few weeks, how would you attack them if you're the Utes, offensively and defensively?
Yeah, we'll start offensively. It's really easy to me. Throw deep. I mean, if I'm Utah going into this game, Oregon State's probably, on the first drive, I probably do a real heavy set formation where you can, maybe have one receiver out wide, maybe two, and set up a deep play action. I mean, Oregon State's corners were toasted for a half of football. I mean, they tightened up in the second half, and, I think Cam Ward finished with 400 some passing yards. He had like 299 at the half or something close to that. So they did tighten up in the second half, but I would definitely be challenging it, because even going back to that game, Washington State still wasn't, it's not their MO, but they still weren't able to really get a whole lot going on the ground. And obviously that's where Utah leads with too. So if I'm Utah, you've got to hit some big shots against Oregon State secondary. Pick on, Trice Ivy or, Jermod McCoy, two kind of new look corners on one side opposite of Jaden Robinson. I would not be surprised to see Utah take some shots. Oregon State might be a little more, in all likelihood will be more prepared being at home and probably expecting that. But I think if you're Utah, you have to challenge Oregon State secondary. And then, conversely, I think you've got to stop the run game and put pressure on DJ. If you can limit, Damian Martinez, I think going into this last game against Washington State, I haven't seen since it's updated, was averaging, 8.5 yards a carry. If Utah can cut that down to 2 yards a carry, 3 yards a carry, where Oregon State is not getting a first down within 2 plays or 3 plays, force DJ to make, throws, big time throws while under pressure against a secondary that I think is still pretty strong. That's your key right there.
Yep, especially on those third downs. If it's a third and long, it's going to be tough for him to do that, especially if they're bringing that pressure. Okay, last question here for you. What's your prediction for this game? Final score and why?
Yeah, it's a tough one. I see Oregon State's favored in this game. The last I checked was 3 points, and that was a bit surprising to me, but I think it speaks a little bit to, Utah going on the road, Oregon State matching up well with Utah. And at this point, I think Utah is the better team, but I think Oregon State's going to be more desperate for a win. And I think, I do like Oregon State in this game. I'm not sure if it's going to be, the 3-point spread or whatever, but knowing what Oregon State's goals were coming into the year, and I mentioned to you guys before the podcast, they're one loss away from being, hey, we need a lot of help to make the Pac-12 championship. And, not to say that they, couldn't lose this game, go 0-2 like they did last year and make a run at it. I just imagine Oregon State's going to lay a lot on the line for this game. I think it's going to be a very similar to what we saw in Pullman this last weekend, a raucous crowd with big time environment. It's going to be a Friday. Weird things can happen on a Friday. I kind of like Oregon State in like a 24-21 game right now, but at the same token, I could see it going either way. It'd be a pick'em game for me. I do think it'll be, ultimately, Washington State was a 3-point dog to Oregon State this last weekend, and Washington State flipped that. Could I see Utah flipping that this weekend? Sure. But right now I'm sticking with Vegas. They make a lot more money than I do. I'll take Oregon State by 3.
I like that. I'm with you in a lot of ways. This could be the week that it finally catches up to Utah. That they, if Rising doesn't play, that it finally catches up to that offense, and they're not able. The defense isn't able to do quite enough to squeak out another win. I think it could go either way. I think one possession, 3 to 7 points either way would not shock me. If it's Nate Johnson running the offense, I think Oregon State does, like I said, finally, catch Utah off guard and derail that undefeated season. But if we do see Rising return, I got the 7. I think that's going to be the determining factor here is if Evan takes the field in Corvallis. If not, and it's Nate Johnson, I do think the
Yeah,
Beavers
I mean, I think just to kind of add another point on that, looking last week and watching how much the spread against UCLA moved when they thought Rising was going to, like, that's, the Rising effect, for lack of better terms. But I'm 100% with you. I think he's a game changer. Not to say that Nate Johnson's not talented, because I've seen him make some plays these first 4 games that have been very impressive. To pass Bryson Barnes in the depth chart, I think speaks to that a little bit. But you're right. I mean, Cam Rising has won in the biggest moments in this conference, and you just can't replicate that. You can't.
Yeah, he's gone toe to toe with first round draft picks, and he's beat him. He's beat him twice, which is amazing. And to your point earlier, you're saying, okay, how's Utah going to attack this team? Throw it deep. It's got to be Rising if that's what you want to do. That's the same reason that it was 14-7. Against UCLA is they didn't have that aspect of the game. So it's going to be a battle. It's an enjoyable matchup. It really is. These are two hard-nosed football teams that play similar styles, that love to run the football, and they occasionally get a good quarterback like both programs have now. And it'll be interesting to see how it all turns out. It should be a fun one on a Friday night. Brenden, thank you so much for coming on again. That's Brenden with Beavers Edge. You can follow him on Twitter, X, whatever you're calling it these days, at B_slot. Brenden, where can Utah fans find your stuff in case they want to read a little bit up on the Beavers this week?
Yeah, definitely head on over to BeaversEdge.com. You'll be able to get the latest where the Beavers stand with injuries. All the interviews throughout the week and all the nitty gritty, getting you ready for that Friday game. Appreciate you guys having me on. It was definitely awesome, and hopefully be doing it again sometime. And we might be returning the favor the other way too. So we certainly appreciate you guys, and echoing everything you said. I think it's going to be a fantastic matchup. Me personally, Cole, I still don't know how I feel about Friday night games. I think Friday night's a high school night myself, but we'll make do with it in Reeser on Friday.
What time's kickoff?
6 for us. That'd be 7 for you guys. Yeah.
We got a Pac-12 game after dark on a Friday night. It's going to get weird.
Yes, it will. Yes, it will.
It's going to get weird, but it's going to be fun. Love it. Again, Brenden, thank you so much for coming on. We appreciate you. Feel free to reach out anytime, and we'll see you soon.